All right, guys, it's going to be week 9, day 2 Ed Puzzle. This is going to be the progressive era. And in class, we've been talking about labor unions and then the issue with rapid urbanization, industrialization, the idea of child labor and overcrowding, poor working conditions, low pay, and all that stuff. The progressive era is the time period in our country between the 1890s and 1920s where we're going to actually try to fix all those problems. You're going to see the government step in and do this a lot more. A couple pictures we have here in the bottom left. This is actually a picture of child labor. If you notice in Newberry, South Carolina, in our own state, one thing you'll see is that the child doesn't even have shoes on. Okay, in a textile mill, they turn the cotton into textile, into fabric. Okay. So our first slide here is the progressive movement from 1890 to 1920. The progressive movement is going to come out of the populist movement. Remember, the populist movement was a group of farmers who will band together politically to try to get the government to step in to fix things more, specifically controlling when it comes to shipping rates on railroads. Right? Also wanted to back bimetallism. This idea of the common people kind of rising up together will fuel the progressive movement. Again, the movement wants to fix all the problems with urbanization, industrialization. It wants the government to step in and fix those problems of child labor, wants to make rules, wants to fix the problems of poor working conditions, poor living conditions. And to do this, you're going to have less laissez-faire economics. Remember, laissez-faire economics says that the government doesn't get involved in anything. This won't be true in the progressive era. The government's going to start stepping in. So you're going to see increased government involvement in people's lives because the people are asking the government to try to fix things and make things better. Because businesses at this time in our country's history are kind of running out of control, doing whatever they want. Next, there's going to be some famous progressive movement people. Okay? There's a group of people called the muckrakers. Muckrakers were undercover journalists who exposed corruption and issues in government and big business. Right? Literally digging up the muck or the dirt on these businesses and government. Okay? The most famous is a guy named Upton Sinclair who wrote The Jungle. Okay? This book is where Upton Sinclair will go undercover in the meatpacking industry and he'll start discovering what's actually going on in the meatpacking industry, what's going into your meat. And you're realizing that's a bunch of rat feces and actually human body parts being processed in the meat because, again, the businesses don't have any rules for cleanliness of these products. So meat is actually going out contaminated and making people sick. Specifically, muckrakers like Upton Sinclair, his work leads to social reform, directly leading to what's called the Meat Inspection Act. In 1914, where the government says meat has to go through inspection, it has to be only can have a certain amount of contaminants in the meat before it's allowed to go out. Another famous progressive movement person is Jane Addams. She's in the bottom right here. She's often considered the mother of social work. She opens a place called the Hull House, which helps immigrants get on their feet. It'll also be the center for social reform and the progressive movement ideas. Every city will have kind of a Hull House place where immigrants and the poor can go for assistance. You can compare the Hull House, if you're going back to after the Civil War, to places like the Freedmen's Bureau. Very similar idea, trying to help people who need assistance to get on their feet in this country. And another person who's considered a progressive movement person is going to be Theodore Roosevelt. We're going to talk a lot more about him during the imperialism time period in the next chapter. But Theodore Roosevelt obviously will be a president, very famous president actually, and he's going to be a progressive movement because he's known for being a trust buster. Okay, and what a trust buster is, he breaks up trust, and another term for trust is monopoly. So he's going to be famous for breaking up monopolies, forcing monopolies to become more than one business. Very famous Standard Oil will be broken up into several other oil companies because of people like Roosevelt. Okay. Big business will not be a fan of Roosevelt because of him breaking up all those trusts. Okay, so again, progressive movement trying to fix these problems, the idea of monopolies where they're having the prices go skyrocketing, there's no competition, so it's going to create competition. Okay, you got Jane Addams who's going to help people get on their feet by giving them assistance. And then you're going to have muckrakers, which are journalists who are going to write about how bad things are and kind of expose the government, big business, which will lead to public outcry and lead to social reform. Okay. There's going to be some famous progressive era movements in this time period. Right? And these movements, if you notice, will be very similar to the same thing in the 1830s and 1840s. One is going to be the temperance movement will reemerge in the early 1900s. Eventually will lead to what's called the Volstead Act and the 18th Amendment. So by 1920, alcohol will actually be illegal in our country because of progressive movement. Okay? And it'll last about 12 years until it's reversed at that time. But the main reason for the temperance movement, like we talked about before, you have a lot of men working in factories. They're working long hours, 12, 14, 16-hour days. And what they do after they get done with work, they'll often go to bars. They're going to drink, they're going to get drunk, and they're going to go home, and they're going to start abusing their families. And women are going to start gathering and be like, hey, we need to stop this abuse. And it does lead to the temperance movement because alcoholism is considered a problem in the country in that time period. Another famous movement, which again got its start in the mid-1800s, is going to be the women's rights movement. Okay, this is be pushed forward again. Initially, when women tried their hand at equality with the Seneca Falls Convention and Declaration of Sentiments, it doesn't work initially. However, in the early 1900s, women will organize again. They're going to be working in factories again, specifically during World War I. And they're going to ask the question like they asked in the 1830s and 40s, if we can do the same jobs a man can do, we're making the same type of money a man can make, why don't we have the same rights? And with this second push, they're going to gain the right to vote with the famous 19th Amendment. The election of 2020 is very famous because it's the 100th year that women actually had the right to vote. The 100th anniversary of it. Some famous women in this time period of women's rights, you have Alice Paul and Carrie Chapman Catt are famous women during the women's rights movement. Top left picture here, you have the temperance movement dumping out illegal alcohol. Eventually, during the Prohibition era, which we'll talk a lot more in Chapter 7, they'll destroy any alcohol that's found that people aren't supposed to have. And then you have women here trying to get equality. Women famously, like in the picture in the middle here, they would wear all white and do marches and protest in that. That was just, that kind of dress in that time period for women's rights. And then in the bottom right, you have the actual newspaper headline that, the U.S. has voted dry on January 16, 1919. Okay, both these movements kind of come to fruition in the 1919s and 1920 time period. And our last one, there's some other progressive movement changes. One is going to be the Federal Reserve Act. We've talked about the idea of a national bank throughout the early 1800s. The Federal Reserve Act is going to give the national government control over the banking and money supply. The idea that the Federal Reserve will try to control inflation and prevent bank failures. The idea, like back then, if a bank closed and you had your money in it, you lost your money. Today, that's not the case because we have protections against that, specifically the FDIC. But back then, if your bank closed, you would lose your money. And the Federal Reserve is supposed to try to prevent that. And there's be some famous amendments passed during this time period. One, probably the one that everyone hates the most, the 16th Amendment, which gave the Congress the power to collect federal income taxes. Remember when we talk about the Austrian Federation, one of the weaknesses was they couldn't collect taxes. Now the 16th Amendment, requires the federal government or allows them to collect taxes. And if you don't pay it, you can actually go to jail. And in the 17th Amendment, U.S. senators would be directly elected. So instead of what happened before the 17th Amendment, senators were elected by the U.S. House of Representatives. U.S. House of Representatives would take a vote, and then they would elect senators or who they wanted. Eventually, with the 17th Amendment, senators will be directly elected by the people. Okay, so the people have more say. Democracy will increase in the progressive era. And all this is famous for being passed under Woodrow Wilson, who will be president from 1912 to 1920. Just a famous poster, making fun of, I want your taxes, paying taxes is patriotic. Taxes do help. We want to make sure things in our country go well. Some people will say there's too much taxes. Some people say there's not enough taxes being paid. Okay, but that'll be it for the progressive movement. Make sure you're getting those notes down and have a great day.